Male specimen, approximately 30 years old. Approximate time of death, 30 hours ago. Blunt force trauma to the thoracic cavity. Ribs 3 through 9 caved inward. Left arm disarticulated at shoulder. Tongue appears absent. Edges show sign of tearing. No surgical marks, no predation, no signs of ligatures. Orbital muscles tensed. Eyes remain open. Observed injuries do not align with any fatality profiles known. Cause of death, unclassified traumatic event. Case remains open.
This is Creepy Crossroad, where history, horror, and the unexplained meet at the crossroads where every turn leads somewhere darker. I know we like our paper trails, our case files, our maps, articles, something that can give you something that directly points to, yeah, this actually happened. Unfortunately, in Alaska, that's not really how things work. These stories that they have carry facts. They're passed down from generation to generation. The thing is that if somebody tries to exaggerate any story or tries to stretch the truth a little bit, they immediately get called out. The reason being is because it's about respect. If somebody exaggerates or elaborates or tries to, make it bigger than it was, it's actually disrespecting the person who went through it, and it's disrespecting the lineage of the story. So if somebody does try to do that, it's like, they're done. Nope, you're not allowed to tell the story anymore, or they get pretty severely reprimanded. What makes it even wilder is anthropologists and researchers have confirmed these oral histories. They have accurately described real things that have occurred throughout time, like volcanic eruptions, ancient migrations of the caribou herds, even climate shifts. We can date these back thousands of years. So if it's been that accurate for that long, maybe we should take what they say a little bit more seriously, especially when communities who have never met and describe the exact same thing, the same sounds, the same warnings, over hundreds of years apart and thousands of miles away from one another. Maybe that holds a little bit more weight than just some legend or lore. And now that we have the oral history part kind of covered, out here, isolation is normal. But when an entire town decides to just book it and never come back, that's not just survival, that's something based out of fear. And that is where Portlock comes in. There's one specific story that gets passed around in that area, in surrounding towns near where Portlock used to be. And it's one of those ones that it gets late, you get the fire going, and the stories come out. And this specific story was one night back when the cannery was still running. It was late, most of the workers were already asleep or had gone home, but a couple of the guys stayed up, playing cards, drinking coffee to keep an eye on the fire that they had set. And that's when they heard it. Knocking. Not someone at the door, not footsteps, but this slow, deliberate. Everyone froze and sat there silently listening. And this went on not just one night, but several nights. One guy from the group finally decided to check it out. On his day off, he went out, and he, was an experienced hunter, especially for that area. A few hours passed, then a day, then 2 days, and it was decided to form the search party. And that's when they found the creek. They didn't find him exactly. They found pieces of him floating down the river. First it was an arm, and then part of his leg. This is where it all started. Hunters began disappearing one by one. One man was found face down in a lagoon with his chest completely caved in. Another man was found with his tongue had been ripped out. People were going missing, and it's reported up to 30 people, some say more, went missing from the town of Portlock between 1921 and 1940. And why anyone was there to begin with, The spot we now call Port Lock or Port Chatham, a fishing hub in the early 1900s. This location was picked because the surrounding waters were so rich with salmon, herring, and it had a deep water anchorage so ships could load in and out very easily, even through rough weather. By 1921, there was a post office, housing for workers, a school for the kids, and a bustling cannery itself. It wasn't a big town, but maybe a few hundred people, but it was steady work and in a very isolated part of Alaska. At first, the strange stories didn't make the papers. They traveled through the word of mouth, missing logger, tools found scattered in the woods, odd whistling in the hills, and that's when the bodies started turning up. And they weren't being mauled the way you would expect from a bear attack, which was not uncommon at the time, but people knew what to look for when a bear did attack. There was very specific, trademarks. The injuries that they did find were brutal, but different. There were crushed bones, torn limbs, missing body parts, without signs of scavenging. People also started reporting massive barefoot human-like footprints. Sometimes they'd follow along the trail for a while and then just stop mid-stride as if they just vanished. Now, Sugpiaq elders said that this already matched a being that they had a name for, the Nantinak. Something half human, half animal, big enough to carry a man, silent enough to stalk you without a sound until it wanted you to know. Even after Port Lock was abandoned, reports didn't stop. That was the weird thing. Fishermen from nearby Port Graham and Nanwalak claimed to see huge upright figures watching you just from the shoreline. And then a 1970s hunting party reported hearing loud, deliberate knocking deep in the woods, followed by a complete unnatural silence. I've been walking through the woods before, and then all of a sudden it's just silence. And to me, that is one of the most terrifying things to happen. Like, if I see a bear, or if I see a moose, or I see something, I'm seeing it and we're good. But when everything else gets quiet and all of a sudden, that's when my skin crawls. That's when the hair on the back of my neck stands up, because when the prey gets quiet, it means the predators are around. But then in the early 1990s, a school teacher visiting the area said they found very large human-like tracks in the mud near an old cannery site. The tracks led into the trees and then just disappeared. And then again in 2015, a man camping near Dogfish Bay, just 20 miles from Port Lock, reported hearing whistling and what he described as two heavy-legged footsteps circling his tent in the middle of the night. Like, hard no. You can hear twigs, you can hear branches breaking, and this is why I keep my dog with me anytime I go anywhere, because he's going to be able to smell it, see it, or hear it way before I am. And no. By the late 1940s, most families had already left. The danger wasn't really worth the steady work that was there. Now, the postmaster was the last to leave in 1951. He closed up the building, boarded the door, and left. He said that there was nothing worth staying for. Some say it was economic decline or better jobs elsewhere that ended Port Lock, but the people who live there will tell you the same thing. They left because something was killing them off, something was hunting them, and they believed it was still there. It started raining on me. So in the southwest part of Alaska, there's this lake that is so big, you could fit the entire city of Los Angeles in it and have room for the suburbs. This is Lake Iliamna. Over 1,000 square miles, there are depths that drop close to 1,000 feet and water so cold within a minute your breath is gone. And most people can only see this from the air because there are no roads to and from, so unless you're flying from Anchorage to Bristol Bay, you really aren't going to see this lake, even though it is the largest lake in Alaska. From the air, it looks really desolate and uninhabitable, but if you talk to the locals, you'll hear something different. Something's alive in that lake, and it's been there longer than anyone can really remember. The Dena'ina and the Suak people have told stories about this giant water creature that has been here for generations, long before any settlers came with their fishing boats and their rifles. And what's interesting is the descriptions haven't changed. It's this huge, dark, just moving underneath the surface fast enough to cut through a wake and big enough to roll a canoe. Even the Department of Fish and Game admits that there's something strange going on here, and they've been logging official records since before 1940. There's sightings of this very large, unknown animal just under the surface, and it could be a lot of different things, so let's go through and list the suspects. We'll take a roll call of what actually lives in Alaska to be able to rule them out. So we have the massive white sturgeon. It's armored like a dinosaur, growing over 15 feet long. And then you've got the Pacific sleeper shark, and those can grow up to 20 feet long. And they're typically scavengers, but their jaws are so strong that they can actually crush a steel crab trap. And then you have the salmon shark, which is basically a smaller version of the great white. They've been known to patrol the river mouths during spawning season. There is Bristol Bay's seals and sea lions, which can and do wander inland through the connected waterways. Even the occasional orca actually chasing its prey up into the inlets. And that's just the confirmed stuff. Now add in underwater caves, access to the ocean, and depths we have barely mapped, and suddenly the term monster doesn't sound so far-fetched. If you talk to scientists, they're going to say that it's probably sleeper sharks that everybody's been seeing. They've been found in the lake before, but they're slow movers, and witnesses have described something moving very, very fast. Others point to seals or killer whales that have been trapped inland. Even prehistoric survivors like the plesiosaurus or the mosasaurus left from when the lake was once connected to the ocean is definitely an option. But here's where things get wild. That recently some paleontologists actually found an articulated late Triassic fossil in Alaska, and this is called the thalattosaurid. It's a marine reptile that did live here around 210 million years ago. If one type of prehistoric predator could survive long enough to be found here, maybe others did too. But then there's my favorite theory, the giant northern pike. Now, don't get me wrong, pike scare the out of me. I grew up with them, specifically in this lake. I used to dangle my feet off of the dock here, and if I had like red toenail polish on, they would come up and try to bite my toes. They're extremely aggressive and a very daring fish. I've seen them just come up and grab a duckling as it's following its mom. They give no. They have like razor sharp teeth. They can get to a decent size, but I mean, to be able to do what they say, I mean, this thing would have to be enormous. And I mean, again, this is an enormous lake with not that many predators going on, like people-wise. So, I mean, is it plausible? Maybe. And if this type of predator can just grab a baby duck, then if you just like make it bigger, there is a local who said that he witnessed something somewhat similar. And there is this swan story, and the type of story that when you're told the details, you don't forget it. One man said that he watched a full-grown swan, and I mean, these are like trumpeter swans. These things are huge. But he said he saw it gliding along the surface of the water, only to see it jerked violently downward. The water bubbled up for a second, and then it went completely clear. And then half the swan just floated back up. The other half was gone. Clear, instant, and whatever did it had power and speed. It's not just the locals who have tried to get answers either. Researchers have been coming to Lake Iliamna for decades, dragging sonar rays, running deep water cameras, and even attempting full-scale drags over certain areas. But the lake is so unpredictable. But it has a size and a depth that is so vast, they even methodically trying to record this thing is impossible. Underwater visibility can drop to inches, and a network of submerged caves and channels means anything could be living here and vanish into the dark in seconds. The most that they've come back with is like blurry sonar hits and unexplained shadows, but large shapes moving that they have no answers for. It just gives more questions than anything. And it's not just animals that vanish into this lake. In 2005, a young man set out to kayak the perimeter of the lake, which is about 1,000 square miles, and he never came back. No boat, no body, nothing. He was not the only one either. There are other cases scattered over the decades where there's strong swimmers, experienced boaters, and hunters, and they simply just disappear, or their boats are found floating with no evidence of duress at all. If something that size can keep itself hidden in a lake this big, it makes you wonder what else is watching. This next story, it's one of those ones that get passed down from generation to generation, and it's not one that's just talked about in the open. Out here, people don't bring this one up right away. You gotta have some trust between the person you're having a conversation with, so they're not gonna laugh at you, or worse, go out blabbing about it to some random person. This really is freaky because I can't see past the fog. I see birds moving. But when the campfire is burning and you sit down, they start talking about these things. Not things that are found deep in some lake. These are things that are just beyond the tree line, that make you think, is this my eyes playing tricks on me? Is this my ears playing tricks on me? Or is this something playing tricks on me. This is something called the Urson rat, also known as the little people. But that name doesn't really fit. This isn't some cutesy woodland folklore like elves or leprechauns. The Urson rat are known to be very unpredictable. They can be helpful, but then they can also be extremely dangerous. And unlike so many myths that get exaggerated over time, these stories are remarkably consistent. Whether they come from the Dena'ina Yupik, Inupiat, or other native Alaskan communities, all of the stories have been compared and they all seem to line up. In the past couple of decades, elders from the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta area have spent over 20 years recording these events, eventually publishing a 500-page book to make sure that these accounts wouldn't vanish. This isn't some creepypasta, this is an oral history archive. One of these stories is about a hunter out near the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta who swears he saw one 3 feet tall, standing perfectly still in the tree line watching him, and he said that he was wearing some type of clothing that wasn't anything that would match today's modern attire. It wasn't sewn the way that we would sew it, something much older. Like many of the accounts, he blinked and it was gone. And then another man from the same region said that he and a friend were traveling by snow machine, and yes, we call them snow machines, not snowmobiles. It's a thing. Just go with it. In the early winter, they came upon these small human-like tracks in the snow, and they were too small to be children, and there were no villages around for miles. And they followed the prints until they ended abruptly at this just rock wall. And there wasn't like you could like go right or left or scale this thing. It just stopped. There was no cracks, no opening, just gone. I need it. There are some facets of this story that are more interdimensional style, which is where I'm like, but I mean, who am I to say what is and isn't? Then there are some accounts that lean more towards the strange, but not so hostile. Like a woman in Western Alaska said that her grandmother had once dropped this handmade ulu, which looks like this. It's a very common traditional utensil that they use up here. But she dropped it while she was fishing and could not find it anywhere. And then months later, that same knife appeared on a stump next to her smokehouse, and it had been cleaned, oiled, and there was no one in the village who claimed to have touched it. This is not working. There's also been a bunch of bush pilots who have reported seeing these small figures running across the open tundra on the ridgelines, and there's no cover and no human settlement for hundreds of miles. These sightings are often very brief and just for a split second or two, but enough to leave the pilot questioning what the hell they just saw. There can be times where you're like, oh, did I just see that or didn't I? But then when multiple accounts come out talking about, God, I keep hearing things and it freaks me out. When multiple accounts come out saying that they saw the same thing, that's where things start to get freaky. I'm going to lose my glasses because it is getting to the point where I can't see anything. Now, one of the darker accounts that really kind of got to me was in Western Alaska. There was this little girl who had wandered off into the trees, and the family was freaking out. They couldn't find her. And then hours later, she just strolls back in as if nothing had happened. Completely calm. Everything was fine. She was not injured at all. And she told her family that these little people invited her to come live with them. But there was a catch. She had to forget who she was, she had to forget her family, and she could never go home. Now, I have several nieces, and I mean, that is a parent's absolute worst nightmare. And to know that there's these things out in the wilderness when you're going out blueberry picking that could just be like, come with me. It's like, no, that's not a light story. That's pretty terrifying. But it's shockingly easy to disappear in these woods. You don't have to even go very far. 1 minute you're in sight of camp, and then the next you're gone. I've been up the river, and I've seen a full-grown moose over 1,000 pounds hop out of the river and go into the tree line and just poof, gone. It's not hard, and it's so dense and vast that these things do happen. Elders say that being lured by the Urson rat are not the strangest parts of these stories. What's weird is that time kind of runs differently with them. Being there for a day can be a year in our time. And then when people do return, sometimes they don't return exactly right. Not that they're injured or anything, but sometimes they come back not remembering things from their childhood, not recognizing where they live, or completely forgetting the language. And then they start speaking in this dialect that, like, fluently, that nobody recognizes. It's, again, accounts that have happened over and over and over again. Some of those other accounts have come from trappers here in Alaska. When you're trapping in Alaska, you have to imagine hundreds of miles of silence. You could be hours away from another soul. It is very isolated. And so this one hunter from the Kuskokwim River was out checking his trap line. He heard a whistle just outside the tree line. And so he decided to whistle back. And then the whistle returned, but on the opposite side of him. And then it started going all the way around him, like hopping around. And no person or animal would whistle back in a circular, like I'm surrounding you type of form. So that's kind of creepy. Now, again, me being the skeptic that I am, there are creatures out there that can make a whistle sound. Marmots. Some say ptarmigan, which I think sounds nothing like a whistle. And then there are some foxes that can do this screeching thing that kind of sounds like a whistle, I guess. I mean, I'll let you decide. After he heard this, he got back on his sled and took off back to town because he just, hard pass. Rule of thumb, if you're out there in the middle of the wilderness, don't whistle back. Like, just don't. Another account was near the town of Bethel. Someone was out hunting and they were off by themselves. Typically drive in a few hours and then you get on your four-wheeler or whatever it is and then you go further in and then you typically hike. You're pretty alone out there. One man said that he was out hunting and out of nowhere he heard his cousin calling his name. And this was a childhood name that only his cousin knew. And it was the same tone, same inflection. So like he started following it. He was like, oh shit, like my cousin's out here. And so he followed it for a good mile and a half, and then it just got silent, and he just decided to turn around and book it and go back to camp. And when he got back to town, he realized that cousin who had been calling his name had been in Anchorage all week. So he vowed from that point on that he was never going to go hunting by himself, and honestly, I don't blame him. One of the creepier stories, not so much scary, I mean it is scary, but to me creepy, is down in the remote island of Kodiak. Somebody woke up in the middle of the night feeling their hair being played with, and it wasn't like it was pulling and painful, but it definitely like intentional, I'm playing with your hair. And when they turned to look, there was nothing there. And then they immediately heard some giggling afterwards. So to me, like, nope. If I was to wake up and like turn and see something, I would be terrified. I don't know if I could come back from that one. That is, ugh. One of the funnier stories comes from a town of Noatak, and it was a bunch of people at the same time saw this little man sitting on a log smoking a pipe. And like all I can think of is like the Keebler elves or whatever those ones are, these guys.
Elves exist.
Then all of a sudden, no splash, no rustle of trees, just boom, gone. And again, we all saw the same thing. We're not crazy. So that, gives some more validity to these stories, as it's more than just one person witnessing this thing. Over in the Teller area, there were two hunters. They were out hunting for moose, and they saw these two little people butchering a caribou, and one of them was like no taller than a kid, and just hoisted this whole animal up and started heading off into the tree line. And for context, a bull caribou can weigh anywhere from 350 to 400 pounds, and a female can weigh up to 200 pounds. And so that would be like having a 4-foot person like hoisting up a refrigerator and just booking it to camp or to the tree line. Like that, these things don't happen. Like that doesn't make sense. It was soaking wet. So there's not been a helicopter or a grid search or, like an actual investigation on these things, but for decades, these stories have been accounted for in oral tradition storytelling into these books now that anthropologists, again, use these as facts to base off of geological events. So it's tough because you say, oh yeah, you hear these about these little fairy gnome things who are interdimensional beings that are tricksters, and it's like, there's no way that this is real. But when you have so many accounts lining up that just match, unmatch, and match, it's like, you can't just dismiss it. I try to explain the size of this place to people in the lower 48, and they don't get it. And then once they get here, they tell me there were no words that you could have said to explain the vastness, the size, the grandeur of this place. It is just beyond what, you can really comprehend. If you were to put Alaska on the United States map, you could see that it's pretty big, and Alaska alone has more coastline than the entire United States combined. So that puts things in perspective a little bit, that shows something can hide quite easily here. From a town that ran away in fear, to something in a lake too big to name, to a creatures that can walk between worlds, and knowing that there's more hiding places than anyone could ever search here. Alaska doesn't just keep secrets, it makes you a part of it. And out here, you really never know who's doing the hunting. So until next time, stay creepy.